Welcome to this video series focused on learning Microsoft Azure. This series is designed to get you up and running with Microsoft Azure quickly. If you prefer written documentation, the article for this topic can be found on my blog, which will be linked in the video description. This is part 6, and we're going to be looking at container storage within an Azure storage account. Containers are used to store blob data, which is binary large objects. For example, any images, videos, audio files, PDFs, text files, software executables. Basically anything you can save as a file can be stored within a container. So we already have our storage account that we created in the previous video. So to create a container, we can go to Containers, and then New Container. So for this container, I'm going to call it Private Container. I'm going to leave the public access level as private. We'll go over the blob and container access levels in a minute, and then press Create. That's created us a new container, which is private. And if we click it, we can go into it, and then we can upload some files. So I'm just going to select Upload, select the file, and then select some temporary files. Now that they're uploaded, we can click a file, and it will give us the details of the file. We can see it's created a modified date and any other information. We can see the access tier. We can see any previous versions or if any snapshots have been created. And we can also press Edit to view the contents of the file if it's supported. Or we can press Generate SAS, which is a shared access signature, which we can use to give access to the file, but we'll cover that in a minute. So every file that gets uploaded to a storage container gets a unique URL, which can be found here. So if I just copy this URL and browse to it, we can see that the URL is the storage account name .blob.core.windows.net/private container, which is the name of our container. And then it has got the file name. So if we go to this, we'll get an error saying that the resource doesn't exist. And that is because our current storage access level is set to private. So there are a couple of ways that we can actually give access to files publicly that are stored in containers. We can create a shared access signature based on a signing key, which we'll cover in a minute, and then go to generate a shared access token, which will generate us a token for around 8 hours, which will then auto expire. So if we copy the token URL and go to it, it will then pull back the file. But if you don't want to create shared access signatures for every file, what you can do is, if we go back to our storage account, we can create a new container and call this public container. And then set the access level to blob, which gives us anonymous read access for blobs only. So we can set it to blob and then create. And then if we go into our public container and upload the same files, once they're uploaded, I can then click a file, copy the link, and then paste it in the browser, and it will open up straight away without the signature. So we can see the only thing different is this says private container and this one says public container. So that's the difference between private and public containers. Public has anonymous access, they can just be accessed, and private, if you want public access, you have to generate a shared access signature for the file. Also, when accessing files, you'll see that with this one we accessed the storage account .blob.core.windows.net, then the container, and then the file name. There's also a secondary link which can be used if you have certain redundancy settings enabled. So I'm using RA-GZRS, or you can also use RA-GRS, which also stands for read access. So what that does is it gives us read access from the secondary region that it's paired with. So if you come down to endpoints, we can see we've got our primary endpoint and our secondary endpoint, and it's just added a -secondary after the storage account name. So if I copy the storage account name -secondary and then duplicate this tab and then replace the name, it also loads the image because this is now coming from the secondary region, which is UK West, and this is coming from the primary region, which is UK South. So it's good to keep in mind that if you've got read access redundancy enabled, if for whatever reason this primary endpoint goes down, the files can still be accessed using the secondary endpoint, but you can't write to it using this endpoint. All the writes have to go through the primary endpoint. Another thing to keep in mind about containers is that by default you can set a access tier, which I've got set to hot. So that is stored, if you go to the overview and go to default access tier, we can see that this is set as hot by default, the blob access tier. So any file that gets uploaded to the container automatically has a hot access, which is more expensive to store and has faster access. But not all files need to be hot. So the options you've got is you can select a file and press change tier, and then change it from whatever it is to a different access tier. So if I change that to cool, it will now cost less to store the data, but when the file is accessed, it will be ever so slightly slower. If you come back to the container and then go to lifecycle management, we can create rules that basically say if a file is over a certain age, we can move it to a different type of tier. So if we do 30 days, leave it as block blobs and base blobs. You can, if you've got any append blobs or you want to apply this to snapshots or versions, you can do that. I'm just going to leave that as default. So we can set it to if the file was last modified greater than 30 days ago or 60 days ago or 5 years ago, then you can either automatically delete the blob or move it to cool storage. So that's just some lifecycle management you can enable to reduce the cost if you've got large amounts of data. So now I've enabled that. Any file that is older than 60 days in this case, I'm not sure why I called it 30, will automatically be moved from hot storage. Will automatically move from hot storage to cool storage automatically. Now, how do we actually access these through an application? So if we come back to the storage account and we come to access keys, we'll see we have two access keys for our account. There's a key and a connection string. So this connection string, either key 1 or key 2, is what you'll use in your application to connect to the storage account to then upload or retrieve documents. So for an example of this, I'm going to use Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer to connect to my storage account. So to get this, if you go to Overview and press Open in Explorer, it'll give you the option to download the Azure Storage Explorer. If you just install this, it'll then open to this. So if we come back to our access keys and then copy our connection string and then attach to a resource, select storage or service, use the connection string, paste the connection string into the connection string box and press next, and then connect. We will then connect to our storage account using Azure File Explorer. And then we can basically administer, upload files from here. We can go in and we can see the files. And there we go, that's opened the file. Now, for an actual application, you wouldn't use this. This is more of a bit of a management way to use it. You would use one of the Azure SDKs. So if you just search for Azure SDK and go to the Download Azure SDK and Tools, and then select whatever programming language you want to use and go to the documentation, you can then select the service you're using, which in this case is storage. And then on the side, select the type of storage account. So I'm going to go for blob containers, and then overview. Then it gives you all the information you need to install the package and then authenticate with your application and then upload in blobs to the storage account. So to actually integrate this into your application, you would use these these access keys to give you permissions even to private containers so you can upload the files. If for whatever reason your key gets leaked, like I have here, and I've just shown my key to the internet, you can press rotate key and then it will generate you some new keys. And you can do that for key 1 and key 2. So the reason they give you two keys, so you can use a secondary key while you regen key 1, and then if you need to regen key 2, so then if you need to regen key 1, you can then just swap to key 2, and then your application should have no downtime. You can set rotation reminders, so it will notify you to rotate the keys. However, this won't rotate the keys for you. You still have to manually come in and then rotate the key or use the Azure CLI. Now, the last thing I want to show is deleting and recovering files. So if we go into our public container, and I just close some of these. So we've got our file that is on our public container, on our primary region, and we've got a file that's on our secondary region on the public container. So if I come in and just tick a file and delete it, or it gets deleted through the API or whatever, that file is now gone. So if I give it a few seconds and then refresh, the file no longer resolves. Let's say you've done this by accident. You can then tick show deleted blobs and it will show the file here. If no deleted files show here, if you come back to your storage container and go to overview, soft delete for blobs needs to be enabled for that to actually show. So just click enabled, or if it says disabled, click disabled, tick the box and type how many days you want it to be stored. So if I come back to it and then show deleted blobs, we can see that has been deleted. If we just click it, go to versions, we can see the previous versions, and then just right click, make current version. That will restore it. So we can close, it now says current version. And if we go back to our web browser tab, we can then refresh, and it's now back. This isn't just the case on individual files. If you accidentally delete a storage container, so if I delete this entire storage container because I wasn't paying attention, I was meant to delete another one, that's now gone. After a couple of seconds, the files will also then stop resolving because they no longer exist. I can then tick show deleted containers, click the container, it says this container has been deleted. You can just simply press undelete and then save. Successfully undeleted the storage container. It's back with all the files. And then if we refresh, the image is now resolved. And that's how to delete and undelete files and entire containers. So that is a quick overview on how to set up and use Azure storage containers within an Azure storage account.